My name is Jeff Pearson. I'm with the Water Commission. I'm one of the deputy directors for DONR. Thank you all for coming here. I think this is a great day, great occasion, and we tried to schedule a public meeting as soon as we could after the decision was made at the commission meeting on April 18th. So we're all here to learn about the Waimea mediated agreement. I'm not going to be doing too much here. I'm going to try to introduce people from all the parties and whoever's here from staff, and then I'm going to turn it over to Robbie Alm, which is our mediator for the agreement. And once Robbie speaks, then there'll be a presentation by EarthJustice. They got a PowerPoint presentation. Then there'll be a smaller presentation, I think, by DHHL. And then pretty much after that, it should be open for discussion or questions or comments or whatever you want. So, you know, this is a public meeting, it's your meeting, so hopefully we can get to that soon. But the idea, of course, is to share with you what's in the agreement, what it means to you, what it means to your streams, and we'll move on from there. So first, the agreement took place, and the immediate agreement took place with 5 parties involved. But before I introduce the parties, I'm going to introduce the mediator on this whole issue, which is Robbie Alm, standing over here. I'd give him a standing ovation if it was me, but anyway. Staff, I have Dean Ueno, who's the stream branch chief. A couple of his staff, Aaron Strouch and Rebecca Alakai in the back over there with their uniforms on. Got to make sure I get everybody here. We have a couple of commissioners here. We have Kamana Beamer in the back in the white, Neil Hannes, and Michael Buck. And the DOH representative is Keith Kawaoka. And our deputy AG that came along is Linda Chow. Okay, I think I got that group out of the way. So now I'll try to go through our the people that are here from each of the parties. And if I miss someone, when you stand up and yell, please. From EarthJustice should be David Hinken, Kylie Wagner, and Isaac's not here. Okay. From DHHL, it's William Ila and Natasha Baldoff, and their consultant, Jonathan Scheuer. From KIUC, Jason Hines and Don Huff. And from Kauaʻi Agriculture Association, Landis Ignacio and Josh Uehara. And let's see, who am I missing? From Agricultural Development Corp, Myra Kaichi. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted to do, is to let you know that there's representatives from each of the parties that were involved in the mediation, and they're here. So I'm going to turn it over to Robbie, and he can, oh, excuse me. Well, he wasn't part of the mediation.
Keep me out of it.
What's your name? Scott Enright. Scott Enright is here from the Department of Ag. So thanks for being here, Scott. Is there anybody I missed? So okay, so I'm going to ask Robbie just to come up and give a kind of a brief overview of the strains he went through, and then we can have EarthJustice follow him. Thanks, Rob.
Great to be here. Thank you. I'm not going to go through the strains. It was fun. We had a great time, but 14 months of people talking. There's obviously a lot involved here. Nobody knows that better than the people in this room, and the years involved and the issues involved. I think one of the things that people have looked at this for is, unlike a number of water disputes around the island, this did not take 10 or 15 or 20 years of lawsuits and litigation before the parties talked to each other. So that's terrific, and probably has something to do with, this is Kauai and this part of Kauai, but there was a real effort by a lot of people who started off with very different views and not much in common, to find a place where they could come to and try to put before both the commission but also you a way of dealing with this that did not involve the lawyers taking a decade plus of arguing with each other to get us to a point where action could take place. And that was the other advantage here, is things will happen in this watershed now instead of 10 or 15 years from now. And that was a key, I think, to everybody involved in it, was to try to make sure things happen quicker rather than wait for the kind of time it's taken in other places to get any kind of action. So, you know, I would tell you that you had 5 very strong parties, 5 very strong cases that they wanted to make, and yet they worked very hard to try to make sure that it did not derail, that it did not stop, that egos and feelings did not get in the way of doing the right things. So I really appreciated all of them. They're terrific people. And you know, you're going to hear from some of them. But if you have questions, I mean, they're all here. And they're all here to answer your questions about how they feel and about what they're going to do now in terms of next steps. So I think the next is to call up David and Kylie Wager to come up here and talk about EarthJustice, and I think they represented this community.
Thank you, Rob.
Sure.
Aloha, my name is David Henkin. I'm an attorney with EarthJustice, Kylie Wager, also with EarthJustice, and I appreciate the opportunity to work with this community. To be clear, EarthJustice, we're a law firm, we represent people. So the people who we represent are the people in this community, and I'd like to make sure that they're recognized. So we were working in this on behalf of Pōʻai Wai Ola, and so we have Jim Ana, if you want to stand, wave, okay, John Ana, let's see, Wesley Yadao, Galen Kauhi, and Kaina Okua, over there. So, you know, those are the board members of Pōʻai Wai Ola, so the folks that, you know, we most immediately work with, but on behalf of lots of folks in the community. And so, if you could just go with this slideshow and okay. So, the mediation agreement that the Water Commission approved on April the 18th included a lot of different components. Apologies if maybe I should be on this side. Okay, and I'll just ask you that occasionally. A lot of different components involving the various parties that you heard about, the community, KIUC, DHHL, KA, ADC. But it all started in July of 2013 when EarthJustice, on behalf of Pōʻai Wai Ola, filed something with the Water Commission. And what we filed was both a petition, a request to the Water Commission that they revise the minimum flows in the various parts of the Waimea River system. So the main stem of the Waimea and its headwater tributaries up in Kauaʻi. We wanted more water to be guaranteed to be flowing in those rivers and streams. When the Water Code was enacted, basically, you know, it instructed the Water Commission to determine what level of flow is necessary in the various rivers and streams throughout the state. That's obviously a huge task, and you can't do it all at once. So initially, the Water Commission basically said, whatever's there now, that's what should be there, and in the future we can revise that. The problem was that what was there now when the Water Code was enacted and those initial flow standards were set was a highly altered system. Which we'll get into, through 2 ditch systems, Kekaha and Kauaʻi ditch system, that profoundly altered the natural flow in those streams and the flow that had existed, you know, for centuries of Hawaiians being on the land before the sugar companies came at the turn of the last century. So we wanted the Water Commission to put more water in the streams. There was also, so that was our petition, there was also a complaint, and the complaint was that the water that was being diverted out of the streams was not entirely being put to good use, that there was waste happening, and waste is not you know, something that the Water Code wants to see happen, and we wanted to have that addressed. So the first slide. So as I mentioned, the first ditch system that came online in this area was in 1907, the Kekaha ditch, which is within the main stem of the Waimea River, and there are two main intakes. One of them is Kauai, and the other one is Waiahulu, which kind of captures a lot of the flows coming out of Kokee. And during plantation times and into the post-plantation era, huge amounts of water, in fact, most of the water was being taken out of the river at those points. So Kauai, this is looking upstream from the diversion. This was a picture taken around the time of our petition. And you can see a healthy, undiverted, affected stream looking upstream, but then looking downstream, all that wonderful water was flowing into a grate and then eventually going into the Kekaha ditch. And so below that diversion, and here's the boards blocking or the diversion, you can see just sort of dead stream, empty cobbles. Over on the other side, you looking upstream at Waiahulu. So again, this is another large stream capturing a lot of the headwater tributaries in Kokee. And so that's looking upstream. And then at the time of the petition, here's the situation. You've got the stream coming down. You've got this weir. You've got boards blocking the flow of the river. So it's basically empty below. And then that's the intake going into the ditch. You can push me anywhere you want.
Okay.
I'm here. So the Kokee ditch is the other part of the system. So even before it gets to Waiahulu, a lot of these tributaries were being tapped by the Kokee ditch, which was completed around 1926. And so that captured a lot of the headwaters, Waiakuali, Kauai, Kauai Kinana, Kokee, and took that water and put it into the ditch system. It would run down to Pūʻai Reservoir, and then from there either out towards DHHL lands, Pūʻai, or further Makai. And this is just an example of one of the diversions that unfortunately, if you go up there today, it still looks like this because a lot of work needs to be done, but this is Waiakuali diversion. And as you can see, there's a weir across the stream, and pretty much below it, it's dead and stagnant, and all that water gets shunted off into the Kokee ditch. So in this agreement, there were a number of principles that the parties agreed to, and as Robbie mentioned, you had a lot of different parties with a lot of different perspectives and views, but with some of the guidance that we received from the commission at various meetings, some were held here on Kauai, some were held elsewhere, the parties got the message that the first principle has to be that all streams will be allowed to run from the mountains to the sea, and no diversion will ever be a total diversion again. And for us, this was just a critical understanding that here we're blessed to have a lot of water. Unlike other places in the state, there's a lot of water to go around. There is enough water to meet many needs. But one thing we can no longer allow in the 21st century is something that was commonplace in the 19th and early 20th century, which is completely dewatering a stream. So, as part of, remember, we petitioned the Water Commission to ask for the establishment of some higher minimum flows. So we didn't want to see this at Kauai as being the in-stream flow below the diversion, basically zero. Under the agreement, there is a minimum of 2 million gallons per day that will be flowing past this diversion. And in order to accomplish that, because of the way that this diversion structure was built, in the early 1900s, we're going to need to make some modifications to that, and the agreement calls for a schedule for that to happen. So in fact, within 45 days from the agreement, the Agribusiness Development Corporation and KAA are supposed to come to the commission with plans for changing this to allow the 2 million gallons per day to flow. But in the meantime, by removing the boards, so now you can see the notch without any boards in it, at least some flow can be established. So no longer is this a dry stretch of river below the diversion. So this was taken in November when we did, as part of the mediation with the Water Commission staffs, went out into the field and said, let's see what we can do even with the diversion structures we have now. So this represents less than 1 million gallons per day. What the standard is going to be at least 2 million gallons per day. Again, we need to change the plumbing, basically, in order to accomplish that. But the agreement calls for that, and it calls for it to happen relatively quickly. And I should say, there's some things here that, you know, are a little hard to see in this particular picture. But right now, when the water is flowing over this concrete structure, there's like a lip. And so it's kind of going up and out. And the opu, they can get up a lot of things. But this really will present a challenge to native stream animals getting up the stream. So part of the agreement also talks about when the diversions are modified, both for the Kekaha ditch and Kokei ditch, they need to be modified in a way that will allow for the passage of native stream animals up and down the stream and minimize the entrainment or the pulling into the ditch system of the native animals, because if you have opu and opai going into the ditch, they're not going to do so well. So not only are they going to allow for more flow, they're going to allow for a more environmentally and ecologically sustainable flow happening through the stream systems. Right? So here we are, you know, over at Waiahulu. Again, this was the situation when we filed the petition. Basically, no flow going below the boards. Under the agreement, there will be a minimum of 8 million gallons per day flowing past this point. Next slide. And this gives you some sense. So in November, when the commission staff went out into the field and pulled the boards, and they also supplemented with a little bit of water coming out of a diversion gate just makai of the intake to the ditch, they were able to get the level up. Not to 8 million gallons. Folks in the room may have an exact number. I think it was more like 5 or 6 million gallons are reflected in this picture. But you can see the life coming back to the river and the continuity that's so critical to the ability of the native stream animals to be able to thrive once again in Waimea River. This is November. Next slide. Now, Kylie and I went out this morning with members of Pōʻai Wai Ola in order to look at the situation, because under the agreement, again, there's a recognition that some of the diversions need to be modified before we can get to the agreed upon minimum flows. But the diversion structures as they exist today do allow for some flow to be restored immediately while the diversion modification plans are presented to the commission, while the community has an opportunity to comment on whether those plans are meeting the criteria of allowing the passage of native animals and minimizing the entrainment in the ditch system and all that. We know that's going to take some time. Everything takes time. But in the meantime, by pulling some boards, as we saw in November, you can restore flow. This morning, we came out and unfortunately, the boards were still in place at Waiahulu. They had been removed from Kauai, so you had about that, not quite 1 million gallons flowing there. But at Waiahulu, the boards were still in place. Next slide. So the stretch right below the boards of the stream was basically dry, creating this kind of impassable area. We'll leave it there for now. And then water was being returned from that gate out of the ditch downstream. Maybe as kind of an illustration of the way in which the parties were able to cooperate in order to come to this agreement. As it happened, as we were driving down from these diversions and got to the Mauka power plant, we ran into Landis Ignacio, who works for KA and helping to manage the ditch. And I mentioned that I had been up here looking at Kauai and Waiahulu, and he said, "Looks good, right?" And I said, "Well, Kauai looks good, but Waiahulu is still blocked." And so we had a conversation and talked about the need to make sure that this stretch is watered even before the diversion is modified to achieve all the goals of the agreement. And so Landis went up there, and I don't have his pictures, but he showed me on the phone as I walked in the door, and they pulled some boards and modified them. So now, from this morning to tonight, this area is now flowing with water. So I want to thank Landis for that. So hopefully, you know, that's kind of, it's a harbinger of, like, in the future that the parties will work together, because there's going to be some bumps in the road trying to get this agreement worked out, you know, and making sure that it works the way everyone intended. But I really appreciate that. Now, at Waiakouali, again, this is the old picture. There's not much you can do in the short term, at least that I can think of. If others can, that would be great, to get near what the minimum flow is. But this stream, instead of being basically stopped in its tracks most of the time except for the highest flows, is going to have a minimum of 1.4 million gallons per day flowing and reestablishing the connection as soon as this diversion can be modified. Also on the Kekaha system is Kauai Koi, and I didn't have a chance to talk to Landis about it because by the time when I met him this morning, we hadn't yet gone up to Kekaha. We started down in the valley. So Kauai Koi, under the agreement, is supposed to have a minimum of 4.9 million gallons per day. And again, there's going to need to be modifications to the diversion in order to accomplish that entirely. But even with the existing diversion structure, and I'm sorry it's light in here so it's hard to see, but right here is a gate that is unfortunately wide open. Therefore, all the water is flowing into the ditch, and there is almost nothing getting into Kauai Koi stream past the diversion structure. However, fortunately for us, even the existing infrastructure has this concrete apron just mauka of that gate, such that if you were to shut the gate, it would back up and go back into the stream. And so, as part of our continuing collaborative, working together structure, Landis, if we could shut the gate, then we could start getting something close to the 4.9 million gallons per day that are talked about in the agreement.
100 yards downstream is spinning to another gate. Is that gate's busted?
This one's busted?
Yeah, we can't close it. If you look at it, boys all rapids.
Okay.
100 yards downstream is spinning from another gate.
That's why we're having the conversation. Mahalo. Okay, next slide. So the second guiding principle, and there are a number of guiding principles, but don't worry, I'm only going through two because those are the ones that most directly relate to the issues that we had, and there are other people in the room who can talk to the concerns of other entities. Second principle was any diversion of water from a stream must be justified with no more water taken than is needed for other beneficial uses. Even then, the health of the stream must be preserved at all times. This is a critical principle, basic principle about preserving the public trust in our waters, and you know, if really keeping in line with strong traditional values. If you don't take more than you need, you know, so leave it in the stream, leave it in the river, unless and until you need it. At which point the commission has a process for people to go and ask for water and meet the standards and such. So when we filed the complaint, we were concerned about waste. We were concerned at Kauhau Gulch. So this is near the Honwanji, this is just Mauka of Puʻulua. There's a gate because with the problems with Puʻulua Reservoir, they couldn't put too much water in that reservoir because of dam safety concerns. But water was being taken in Kekaha Ditch, and instead of being left in those Kekaha streams, it was going down Kauhau Gulch. At the time that the Water Commission's expert did an investigation in, I think, December of 2014, there were about almost 500,000 gallons per day going underneath that gate. And when we had a conversation, this is not a mediation discussion, this is in front of the commission, so it's public. We had a discussion about it. It was shared that that was in order to make sure that the gate didn't silt up and kept clean. And ultimately we reached agreement that in order to accomplish that purpose, you don't need to leave it running all the time. I mean, you want to occasionally flush it out, okay, but then shut it down. So I'm happy to report that the commission came up in October of last year, actually the year before, and then again today, so that's the picture today. So it's closed, so that water is no longer leaving the system, leaving the watershed. It's not needed, so it's staying in the streams. Another concern that we had to do with one of two power plants that KA and ADC operate using water from Waimea River. So this one is outside of the watershed. It's at Waiava, and it required, in order to operate, taking water out of the watershed, and once it's out of the watershed, it can't find its way back to the river. If you can read, it's using a Pelton water wheel made in 1908, so it's a very old technology. I think you'll be hearing from KIUC or tonight about some of the new hydro technology that's being proposed for this area. But I think there was a general understanding that taking, recently it's been about 14 or 15 million gallons per day, but just a few years ago it was more like 20 million gallons a day out of the river, out of the watershed, to run it through an over 100-year-old system, was not the best use of river water. And so the agreement calls for basically a 3-year phase out of using river water to generate energy in this way. So after the 3 years, the power plant either needs to be retired or needs to only use the amount of water that is needed for irrigation on the Mana Plain. So that can't be a justification for taking water. If you need it for ag and before you put on the fields you want to run it through a generator, fine. But let's not take it for that purpose. A continuation of this second guiding principle is, as I mentioned, all waters not needed at any given time belong in the stream, and the interim in-stream flow standard numbers are the minimum amounts to be provided. So I've talked about revising the numbers, minimum of 4.9 million gallons, minimum of 8 million gallons. Those are minima. That's the least that the streams and rivers will get. But if people do not need the water to take it out of the streams, they need to leave it in the streams. A very important principle. So when we brought the petition early in the case, this is the end of the Kokee ditch. So I think this is a slide I presented a couple of years ago at a similar community meeting. And we said, don't leave the tap running. I mean, if you don't need this water, don't take it out of the stream in the first place. This is still on the to-do list in terms of figuring out how to do that, because this is a picture taken this morning, or actually this afternoon. So this is Kokee Ditch, just Mauka of that location from a couple of years ago, and there's still, we tried to eyeball it, but 1.5 million gallons per day. Makai below any of the beneficial uses. There's just a lot of water to be taking out of the streams to go nowhere. So I believe today, as I understand it, it's no longer going just open onto the field. Now it goes into a pipe that goes under the highway, and it does go back down towards Waimea River, but far, far Makai of where it was taken. And again, the spirit of the agreement is to leave it in the streams unless you need it. Leave it where you don't take it in the first place, I guess. So that's something that we're going to be working on as we work on implementation. As Robbie talked about, one of the real benefits of this agreement is timeliness. Bird in the hand versus two in the bush. Every agreement, and the mediation agreement is no different, every agreement involves give and take between the different parties. And so I can imagine that there are various people in the room that have different perspectives on what's going on with Waimea River and its water, and you might say, why didn't they get this? Or why did they give away that? And it's because agreements are give and take. And one of the things motivating us, and I think motivating the Commission to be so supportive of this process, and one of the reasons we're so appreciative to Robbie for sticking with us when we were giving him headaches, is the first water case that EarthJustice brought on behalf of communities on Oahu involving diversions from in the Waihole Ditch, that took 15 years to resolve. It went to the Commission, to the Supreme Court, back to the Commission, to the Supreme Court, back and forth, like a ping pong ball. And in the meantime, a lot of stuff on the ground didn't happen. We're currently involved in a proceeding on Maui involving the four great waters, Navaeha. That's 13 years and counting. This one is less than 4 years. And while 4 years is still a long time, not in this arena. We filed the petition in July of 2013. Here we are in May of 2017, and now we're doing implementation. Now you've seen that water is already being restored to the system. More water is going to be restored to the system. Things are going to be allowed to happen, in a smooth way because people have reached agreement. And so, we're really happy to have participated in this process. We think it's a good model for the future. And, like I say, everything's give and take, but we think that this is a big win for this community. We think it's a big win for the river. And we'll be happy to answer questions later, but appreciate your attention.
So I'll stall for a couple minutes while Jonathan sets up the DHHL presentation. I missed a couple of introductions from KIUC. Beth Tokioka is here. And the governor's rep is here, Governor Ige's rep, Carice Gardner. So I think that's everybody. Sorry that I missed you earlier. Other than that, when I don't know if you all caught it, but when David was talking 1.2, that's million gallons a day. So that's the amount of million gallons a day that is flowing through the stream, just to clarify that.
Aloha mai ka.
You're on.
Okay. Aloha mai kako. My name is Jonathan Likeke Scheuer. I was born and raised on the island of Oahu, but I actually credit my love of water issues to being sucked in almost as an urban fresh air child to Waipaw and helping them out with their first land use plan many years ago. I work on my own as a sole proprietor consultant, helping people with water issues, and for the past 6 years now, I've been really honored to be helping the Department of Hawaiian Homelands with water issues around the state. Some of the folks I know in this room come from knowing that in 2014, after 2 years of beneficiary consultation, the Hawaiian Homes Commission passed its first ever water policy since the founding of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act in 1921 that talks about some of these same principles that EarthJustice just talked about are embedded in our policies. We need water for our homelands, but we also don't want to make the public trust suffer at the same time that we're doing those. So I'm not going to talk about the overall agreement. I'm going to leave that for others, but I just want to talk a little bit for folks about DHHL's interest in it. And Natasha, she should really be giving this talk. Natasha's outside counsel, but she's going to help me with the buttons because of the way this is set up. So in the modified agreement, if you've read it or read about the agreement, DHHL had a petition to try and get water from the Waimea River for our lands in Waimea. We agreed to withdraw that petition and put in a new petition requesting less water. So really fresh off the presses, on April 25th, last Tuesday, we filed a petition with the Water Commission asking for a reservation of 6.903 million gallons per day from these streams to be delivered to DHHL's lands for homesteading purposes. It's called a modified petition because we withdrew, if you click again, in 2015 at the request of the Commission. We had filed an initial petition that looked at a very long-term view of all of DHHL's lands and calculated that we might need up to 33 million gallons a day to make all of these very dry lands usable and productive in the meaning of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. So this petition that we filed is modified from that earlier one. We will later, at some point in the future, ask for all the water that we think that the Hawaiian Homes Commission ultimately thinks it needs to make these lands usable and productive. That modified petition, so there's the settlement agreement, but there's a whole bunch of different things that different agencies, including the Water Commission, have to do now that the settlement agreement has been reached. And at the June 20th Water Commission meeting, which is currently scheduled to be on Oahu, the Hawaiian Homes Commission will actually, the State Water Commission will take up the Hawaiian Homes Commission petition for 6.9 million gallons a day, which they can accept, deny, or modify. So I'm just going to talk, I'm going to take much less time than the previous speaker, and I'm just going to talk about three things. How did we develop the petition? I want to talk about the previous Hawaiian Homes Commission actions that led to us filing the petition, and finally, what are the next steps? So how did we develop these petitions? First of all, the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, as well as the State Water Code and other parts of state law, call for this idea of reserving water for DHHL. It's sort of like a kapu for future use. The problem is that since the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act was created, everybody knows the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act was never fully funded to get as many Hawaiians onto the land as was promised. Because of that, in many areas of Hawaii, other developers, private landowners, have managed to develop their lands first and get the nearest and most accessible water sources first. So by the time the legislature finally grants some funds to DHHL to develop a small increment of their lands for homesteading purposes, all the nearby water has been accessed by other parties. So the state legislature actually set aside in the water code this provision for the Water Commission to kapu or reserve certain waters for DHHL, knowing that sometimes it takes a long time to get these lands opened up. It hasn't been done a lot. It's been done on Oahu in 2 areas. It's been done for groundwater on the island of Molokai, as well as for the first time in a non-designated area for groundwater in Keaho on Hawaii Island. It's never been done yet anywhere on Kauai, and never for surface water. So we're trying to do our best when there's not a set process for how do we reserve these water. What do we do? In our application, we looked at all of the approved by the Hawaiian Homes Commission's island plans and regional plans documents, the different land use designations in each of those plans, then using established processes and calculations that the Water Commission has approved for other entities, we've said, well, if the Water Commission has allocated this much water for agricultural lands here, we're going to use that figure to calculate how much for a single family home. We're going to use that calculation. And then we separated it out for the purposes of this mediated agreement between near term and long term. So this is a map of the majority of these lands, 16,000 plus acres, part of the original lands set aside by Congress for the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. And the different colors, and I realize you can't see from where you are, but we'll make this PowerPoint available to the Water Commission so it can go on their website. There's different lands. The biggest area, this sort of pale yellow color, is general agricultural lands, which are mostly non-arable. They're steep gulches, valleys. The time in which they might be someday used for farming is very, very far into the future. Then there's other areas for more intensive agriculture, and around the Pōʻai Reservoir, more intensive agricultural uses. So you have all these different land use designations. And when you look at the Kauaʻi Island plan and the regional plan, if you go to the next slide, for these 15,000 acres, here's the different acreages that come out. For residential homesteads, a couple hundred acres, a couple hundred more for subsistence agriculture. The vast majority of the lands are these broad general agricultural lands, some of which are arable, some of which are not. Special district lands, community use lands, and conservation lands. So we took all those acreages and we took information from the Water Commission itself, from different plans that they've approved, like the State Agricultural Water Use and Development Plan or County Water System Standards, to calculate how much water we think we need to do our best bet. Where there wasn't information available from the Water Commission, we looked to other sources. So I know John Aana because when I worked for OHA, we did, with the U.S. Geological Survey, a study of how much water kalo growers were using around the islands to grow kalo productively. And we took the most conservative number of that. So for some of the kalo lands that DHHL envisions using, we're saying we need 150,000 gallons per acre. Around the state, some were as low as 80, some were as much as 300,000 gallons per acre per day. We chose 150. And then we looked at local conditions. Anybody who lives in this area knows not only is this side of the island dry, but DHHL's lands in particular are south-facing, windy, and steep. So we estimated a slightly higher water demand than you might see in a more windward or central area of an island. So how have homestead beneficiaries been involved so far? like I said, the reservation petitions that we're putting in are based on the island plans, the regional plans, and the water policy plan that I started out with. All of those plans actually were developed and only approved by the Hawaiian Homes Commission after multiple rounds of beneficiary input. And in fact, the goal of the potential partnership with KIUC to do hydropower on these lands comes out of the West Kauai regional plan that went through beneficiary consultation, where one of the priority goals for that plan was, can we do alternate energy uses on these lands that are compatible with an agricultural future? The decision that the Hawaiian Homes Commission made was also when they said, actually in 2013, they said we're going to file a formal reservation request with the Water Commission. That was also done at a public meeting on Kauai. So this has been going on. This has been going on for quite a long time. The outreach for the Kauai Island plan started before 2004 and was voted on by the Commission in 2004. In 2011, after a couple years of beneficiary consultation, the West Kauai Regional Plan was adopted. 2013 was when, on the island, the Commission said during a regular meeting, we're going to formally request water from the Waimea River. In 2014, after 2 years of beneficiary, 10 meetings, twice around the entire state, adopted the water policy plan. We then submitted the first reservation petition in 2015, and this modified one a week ago. I just want to say the mediation agreement was really wanting to come to a productive decision, was what DHHL said. We had a request in for 33 MGD, which we believed had a reasonable basis to it, but the party said we want to come to agreement. We said, okay, we'll agree to pull back our long-term vision and look at what do we really need for the next 20 years or so in this area so that we can get this agreement going. And that's why we came up with the 6.9 million gallons a day figure. We also, though, did reserve the right for our beneficiaries, because really it's a right that the Hawaiian Homes Commission can't give away. It's a duty of theirs that they will have to also try in the future to seek in a reasonable manner, consistent with policy, make their lands usable and accessible for the purposes of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. What's going to happen next? In June, like I mentioned, June 20th, there's going to be, the Water Commission will take action on the modified petition. They can accept it, reject it. It'll be a public meeting. Anybody here or anywhere in the islands can say, hey, that's way too much, or no, that's not enough, or we agree with it. Submit testimony. And then if, and I'm sure KIUC will talk about their processes, if the hydro project is going to go through to get the lease from DHHL, there will be further beneficiary consultation in this area that will happen sometime hopefully within the next 100 days or so. So I hope that wasn't too much, too fast, and I speak fast sometimes, but call my for that. I think we're going to take questions at the end so that everybody else has a chance to present, so mahalo.
The mediated agreement is on the Water Commission's website. So if you go and if you punch in Google DONR or Commission on Water Resource Management, you should be able to find the agreement that we're talking about tonight. As far as if there's been a few references that KIUC is going to talk, and I talked to Dawn and she said, they're here of course, but they didn't really prepare any type of presentation. So if the questions come about and you don't want to direct them at KIUC, of course you can, they're here to answer. So actually that was the only two presentations that were going to take place today. So now it's pretty much open to you, and I likely won't answer these questions, but you can ask them and I can point to the parties, or the parties can stand up and answer them. So feel free to ask away. I know there was already a question for Jonathan with Department of Hawaiian Homelands. Did someone raise their hand?
Yes, question for Jonathan. I was just wondering, when they will be meeting with CWRM, is that meeting going to take place here on this island? And will the public be able to put any input at that time?
Well, at this second, and we haven't, well, I can answer that too, I guess, because I manage the commission meetings, but at this second it was planned to be brought forth on Oahu, but if it need be, we can meet on Kauai. We like to If so, I'd like to see if we can come up with other items that are affecting Kauai that we could meet on the commission, so we don't come over here for one item. That's a big one, yeah. Okay, so in other words, it's not set yet where the meeting is going to be.
But people, the agenda, you can sign up to be on the, I'm speaking for you, Jeff, so you can tell me to stop. But you can sign up to be on the mailing list to get Water Commission agendas. You can submit testimony by email before a meeting. We haven't gotten to the point yet where our neighbor island counties have of being able to give remote testimony, but at least your written testimony can go on the record and make a difference.
How do we get agenda?
The question was, how do they get on,
Get on the agenda.
how do you get on the agenda?
For other things.
I'll bring it forth to myself or any of the branch chiefs, and we can decide if or decide when and what can go on the agenda.
Because we have the same issue with Waimea River, and we were told that only an agency can request co-worm agenda time.
I don't think that's true. Dean, you got a lot more experience than I do with agendas and CWRM.
So if you're going to come back and you're going to talk about Waimea, we have a parallel issue with Waimea. So you can cover both.
Okay, we'll try to stay on topic today, but I agree. I know that Wailua is a huge issue. We are spending time and getting information and working towards Wailua, but it's got a ways to go. But I will not argue with you. That's all true.
With that in mind too, on that agenda, we also have Moloa'a. I know that we have asked, quite a few years ago, about looking at that, and inherently, just seems to kind of fall into idle space.
Why don't I talk with you after the meeting and we can.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you have a question?
Well, I was wondering just what kind of an effect or visual or whatever it has on the community residents. I mean, will we see a change in the river?
You'll see more flow in the river. You'll see more water in the river.
Because I know that the high school students have been dredging the river. So is that going to, because I know that they have the dikes on the side. I mean, I was thinking how much water is going to come down.
Is it 25 million at the mouth? Waimea River, the effects on the river. So,
Because they have to dredge every once in a while the river mouth. So will it mean that now the river is going to flow faster?
well, there'll
and
be
pull more, push?
there'll be higher volumes of water in the river, so the velocities would increase due to the higher volumes of the water.
I have the same question. I have a hard time imagining 20 million gallons of water. It means nothing to me. But I can see Waimea River, and can you give me an idea of how high or how much wider 20 million gallons is?
That's what I want.
Well, this means 20 million gallons a day, of course, which is it's a bigger number. I don't know, Aaron is our field, I dare say expert, but he does pretty much all of the field investigations, all of the, with help from other staff, the reading and measurements of stream gauges and measurements of flow. So I don't know if you can give a better answer, Aaron, with your better knowledge of.
So if you've seen the river today, there's about 15 or 16 million gallons. So 25 is going to be about 60% more.
Okay, so that's how many feet higher and how much wider?
Depends on the river channel that you're looking at. Depends on the slope, depends on
Right there at the crossing the river when you cross it.
at the bridge.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't know the geometry.
You're gonna have to speak up a little bit.
Off the top of my head, I don't know the geometry below the bridge.
Well, is it going to never be low enough that you can cross again, or is it always going to be high enough?
When you say cross, you mean like walk across
No,
the
drive the
sandbar?
vehicles from, are we talking about the swinging bridge?
So it's going to be about 60% more flow minimum than you see today, like right now. Like I just checked, right this very instant. So keep that in mind.
These are all good questions, but they're also sometimes difficult to answer because you know the flow in the streams vary every day. So there's going to be variables and the stream width varies, the stream depth, the stream slopes vary. So it's hard to give you a black and white answer because there's so many variables within the stream. But one black and white answer, of course, is there is going to be more water in the stream. In the back?
It's hard to hear you even with the microphone.
Yeah, we had a couple of presentations done, and now it's into the discussion and
I
question.
think, just as a professional fisheries biologist, even though I've been the district fisheries biologist here for 37 years now, Aaron and I had a very good conversation on how much more we need to work together. But I think, and I applaud everything our Waimea brothers and sisters have done to get this water back. But when you look at the big picture, we're in the largest Waimea River in the state of Hawaii. Right now, when the baseline data, when we collected the biological baseline data, and Andy Good and the hydrologists collected the hydrological data, 95% of the water was leaving the water. 95%. What percent is being returned? That's just one question. And to answer this lady's question, I'm sure Aaron and other hydrologists, this is simple math. You figure out how much volume, how much hydraulic action is needed to blow out that sediment and sand that was never there in 1991. In fact, it's governing the main spawning habitat of the old Kekaha and that river. The only fish in Hawaii that hasn't gotten that river. Kind of important. So that you maybe you can't look at that now, but that needs to be addressed, or our poor brothers and sisters here in Waimea are going to be out there with shovels and buckets for the next 5 centuries.
I think it needs to be addressed first, and as long as that dam is still there and we don't have pulse flows and flushing flows to clean out that sediment problem, are we going to wait and be dependent on our children in the high school to clear out that river that was 95% diverted, and that's why we have a sediment problem? We're going to have to make our kids do it? Come on. We need water back in that stream now to flush out that sediment. And any kind of regulated, moderated flow is not going to do it. We need pulse flows. We need flushing flows. We need a natural flow regime, not anything constant. We got 100 years of sediment that we have to deal with. Really.
That's right.
And we cannot expect our children to do it. It's absurd.
Just one more comment, Jeff. She's partially right. The big flows that we have, when we get the really big floods, it moves a lot of sediment. It also adds a lot of sediment. But what we're really needing are those median or modal flows that transport that sediment all the time. One way to perhaps do that is, and you know all the streams that are diverted, put one back. Out of the 6 diverted, put one back. Hawaii. That would add that flow year-round to keep that moderate flow in the mainstream that might, I'm not a hydrologist, I've taken hydrology, studied it in college. That might help tremendously.
Well, I think Robbie said one statement that was pretty clear at the beginning. So I forgot.
Yeah, you're on the list.
One statement that Robbie brought up at the beginning is, and Mr. Henkin also repeated it, that this agreement is a difficult agreement with a lot of powerful parties working on this agreement. All these parties gave something. They gave in on something, they sacrificed something, they risked something. So as you folks are going to be unhappy, and there's going to be a lot of issues out there that aren't going to satisfy everybody, but I think this is a huge starting point. It's a fantastic method that took place to get this mediated agreement settled by these parties. So not everybody in this room is going to be happy, I'm sure, but I'd like to hope that everybody in this room is happier. So, and we can start there, and I'm not saying this is the end of the world. We can move forward in other ways, and we can satisfy this mediation and still move forward on other issues. if the issues are great enough, of course, we're going to address them and do the best we can. But, you know, I don't know if I want to apologize, but you're not all going to be completely happy. And there's that one saying that a good agreement is where all sides are unhappy. So, you know, and that's not really the case here, I'm sure, because there's a lot of agreement between the parties. Ma'am?
I'm Lisa Ka'ohi. I was born and reared in this community 86 years ago. The river flowed. We had no islands in the river. My fear is, many of you were not here in 1949. There was a big flood. Olokele came out, Waimea came out. Waimea could not merge. It backed up, broke the embankment, the wall. My fear is that with those islands in the river, no matter how much water is going to rise. So who is more important? The citizens that live in Waimea or all of these other entities that are going to start? I'm not against them, but we need to get those islands out of the river. Do we get the Corps of Engineers to help us? I leave that with you folks.
We are recording this too, so we can get this information back and play this back to make sure that we hear all your comments and discussions.
Is that going to be the situation? Because if you're, from what I got from this, is that the rivers, because the streams that are backed up or the canals or whatever, if they take them one at a time, like this gentleman was saying over here, little by little, then maybe it will move the sand all at once. And yes, it's going to go right over the top of the sand and it's going to rise. But what is the projected time frame for clearing out all of the guards on all of these? Yeah, the diversions. Do we have one?
Robbie, is Robbie Alm still here? Do we have the return to the water, some of the return to the rivers were going to take place pretty much immediately. And there's a couple of phases in this, depending on how KIUC moves forward with their power plans. The question was, what is the time frame for the release of all the water?
Well, as David Hankins said, where water can be released quickly by lifting boards, that should be taking place now and in the next little while. I mean, like days.
Then how many, are we talking 5, are we talking 15?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, they're looking at the boards that can be lifted and seeing what comes out of that. David gave you some.
How many diversions are there?
I don't know. They're working on those as we speak. I mean, that's working directly with KAA and ADC on the diversions that are there. And maybe Landis could answer that, and David, but they're going to go diversion by diversion and see what can be done either directly at the diversion or, as Landis pointed out, maybe a little farther down. And then ADC and KAA and ADC are responsible within 45 days to file the plans for the Kekaha related diversions. Hawaiian Homelands needs to go through a community consultation over the KIUC plans. Once that's done, then KIUC will file for the Kokei plans, for the Kokei diversion. So, you know, there'll be a process that will take the next few months in total. But again, the idea was that there were time limits on taking the diversion proposals to the commission, and then once the commission says yes, a time limit to execute those. So the idea was nothing would linger, it would move along. But there is also the plans for any of the diversions are given to all of the parties, and these will be done, you know, by the commission itself. So if folks don't like the diversion modification proposal, there's an opportunity to say something.
Yeah, if I could just add a little information, at least from our perspective. We know the community's been very concerned about the sedimentation that's been building up in the lower stretches of Waimea River. I think that you can ask 10 people and you'll get 10 different opinions about what's going to solve that problem. I know that we heard testimony in front of the commission that during the period of time when there was work being done on the Kekaha ditch such that the black pipe siphon, for those who know the system, but there was a portion of the system that was closed, and so they were not diverting, they were letting all the water back. They weren't taking 15 or 20 million gallons out of the watershed. And the testimony before the commission, which was anecdotal, in other words, it's not scientific, but it's just what someone observed in the community, is that that kept the stream mouth open. They didn't need to dig it out with machine. It stayed open. What I can tell you is that there's a lot of things that we don't know. And to some extent, you know, this agreement was developed in a situation in which there's a lot of things we don't know. And we're going to find out, and we're going to find out by doing. I mean, so some things that we do know is more water in, from our perspective at least, more water in the rivers and streams is going to be better for the stream life. It's going to be better for the Oahu and for the Ōpae. It's going to be better for people who want a more natural ecosystem. It hopefully will increase the flushing out of sediments. Whether it will cure it, we don't know. The fact of the matter is, I mean, the plantation, and there are a few facts. I mean, the plantation started the Kekaha ditch in 1907 and diverted more water from 1907 until 2001 than is currently being diverted. So when people say 20 years ago we didn't have the problem, that was during a period of time when the plantation was diverting more water than is being diverted now. So there's a lot going on in this watershed. There's goats that are degrading the watershed. There were landslides and problems at the confluence of the rivers that led to the initial deposition of a lot of sediment. There are problems with, there's a whole lot of things. And again, you ask 10 different people, you get 10 different answers. We believe that by putting more water in the river, that's going to be beneficial. This is also not the end of the story. What we've agreed to is another interim, and the term interim is important, interim in-stream flow value. It's not the final one, it's not the end of the story. In fact, the agreement specifically says that if KIUC goes forward with its hydro project, so that we're getting a 21st century hydro project, and they're also able to deliver water through that system down on the Minot Plain, the commission is instructed to go back and see whether more water should be put back into the Waimea River at the main stem diversions, not less. So, you know, it took 100 some odd years to get into this unfortunate situation. It's going to take some time. And also along the way, we're going to learn a lot together about what's working, what's not working. Unfortunately, I think we have a system with the commission where things can be adjusted if they're not working. But in the short term, I think that we can celebrate as a community. There's going to be more water. There's more water at some of those diversions today than there was on April 18th. And not much happens in a few weeks, at least not in my 20 some odd years experience as an environmental lawyer. And there's going to be even more happening in the relatively short term when these diversions get modified, and there's going to be even more happening year after year. And we're going to have to just experience that together and try and chart the best way forward as we can.
I live in Waimea Valley. I'm a student that goes to Waimea High School and helps in the river cleanup. And my question was, since you guys are flowing all that water into the river, what is the chance that the water goes over the levees if there's a big rain that comes, especially if the silt islands are not removed?
I can't answer that. I mean, I don't know what is a big rain. You know, there's too many variables. So I'm sorry. I can't. And I'm sure Aaron can't answer that, or you think you can answer that?
Take a stab?
Sure, take a stab.
Are you the levee person?
No. Those big flows, those are in the order of 30,000, 40,000 cubic feet per second. We're putting 30 or 40 cubic feet per second. So how big of a difference do you think 30 or 40 cubic feet per second do you think it makes on 30,000 cubic feet?
I'm not sure.
It's like a drop in the bucket.
I think the concern on his part is, I'm a teacher at Waimea High School as well, part of this project, is that when we initially took the kids out to measure that big stone island where the rivers meet, it was only 395 feet long, which is still huge. And we went out a couple months later in March, and it had grown by 50 feet, just because of the radius. So it wasn't pushing the silt out, it was pushing it and it was catching on the tail end of that island. And this is an island that we measured 10 feet above the water already. So it's not that we don't want the water back, I think they're just concerned about safety and trying to understand the release of the water back. And that's been the big question in our class, is what is the plan for release that keeps us safe and keeps everything happy?
I think instead of waiting for the big flood, there should be some kind of commercial project that digs out those islands and uses the soil for filling up some real estate somewhere. So who has an idea?
He's got that look that says everything's already decided, even though we have this
I got the look
discussion
that-
going on.
I got the look that says, I really can't solve the problem, and
Well,
it's not part of, I really can't solve that issue. We're not really here to talk about it. Of course, it's related, and I don't fault you guys for bringing all these issues up. But again, you know, we're working on trying to share with what took place with the mediated agreement. With every time, with every action, there's a reaction. There's still issues out there that aren't solved. The Water Commission's purview is to get life back into the stream. The streams are your streams and our streams. I don't know. I was hesitant, but I don't want to just pass it off and say it's a Army Corps issue. But it may be Army Corps because they monitor construction and work within the streams. I don't want to just run away and say it's not the Commission's problem because we help manage the source in the stream. So I'm not going to say it's not our problem. That's not fair to anybody. But I really can't give you an answer or a solution today. So I'm not going to fool you and give you something that's uneducated or untrue. So that's why I'm not answering.
Well, I think most people are really anxious and excited to have the water back in the river, but they're also worried. I mean, the dike only goes up to the swinging bridge, and then after that, I mean,
Yeah.
you're on your own.
Michael.
Jeff, what's the process for the community or an agency to initiate an Army Corps of Engineer request to dredge the stream?
Contact the Army Corps of Engineers and then discuss the issue. I don't have her number now, but I worked with, who was it on Maui?
Jesse Pa'ahana. But
Je-
I think if you're to contact the Army Corps Regulatory Division, they'll be able to put you in touch with the right people or the administration.
Dean, has there ever been a request for that for the Waimea River?
I know right now our engineering division is doing work as far as dredging on call when there's a storm coming or if there is the mouth is flush, they will clear on call. As far as the Army Corps, I'm not sure if there has been any projects, but you know, one fear is that less funding for them under the current administration.
So an avenue for community would be congressional, to their congressional representation to make a request that an Army Corps of Engineer initiate a study to see a potential, you know, clearing out of the Waimea. Because we have 100 years of sedimentation there. As staff said, what we're releasing in the stream is only 1/10 of what comes out after a big rainstorm. So it is not going to solve all the sedimentation problems. And if we could get a head start on it by maybe having Army Corps kind of clear some stuff out so everyone feels a little safer, that seems like at a congressional level that might be a good opportunity for the community.
Another thing that may help, sorry if I can, as far as the community, I think I've seen some pictures of those islands and the vegetation that grows on them is helping it to
accumulate more sediment, right? So, you know, one of the easier things to do is immediately is to have community projects to clear the vegetation. Maybe that'll help to provide, allow to kind of.
Ma'am? Yes, go ahead.
I hear you say that they could handle that problem, but many moons ago, maybe almost a year ago, the county went and put a lot of chemicals over there, and it was useless, and it was all us people in the valley that had to swallow those chemicals, and it's since EarthJustice won the suit, and we're the people they fought for or went to work for, why do we have to play Mother May I to everybody else to what we want? Shouldn't maybe EarthJustice help us police that this gets distributed, the sand gets out and it should be as it should be? Not that we all have to play Mother May I get this done, Mother May I get this done. We want it, we're already polite and we already want this done. And so everybody should participate to make it happen. Like when everybody helps to clean the house on Saturday, you know, it gets done. So that's what we want as the people who live on Waimea River and walk every day and go, oh my God, you know, it's accumulating, it's accumulating. These kids come and help, they say, what's going to happen if there's a storm? These are genuine feelings that we have about where we live. So, yeah.
Jonathan, you have a question?
There's somebody.
Oh, so you have a question.
Always restoring the flora going on backyard. Always restoring the flora going on backyard. I use these pump storage plants.
Good question. I'm not going to let KIUC answer that question.
I'm sorry. So, I'm Jason. So,
Jason.
Okay.
Anybody who wants a copy of this, if you give me your card before you leave, I'll probably have it on YouTube tomorrow and I can give it to you so you have a record.
So I believe the question was, how does the agreement on the flow releases affect KIUC's pump storage project? KIUC's proposed project has two parts. One is pump storage, which will just move the same water back and forth between two reservoirs down below. And then there's another part of the project which is going to be run-of-ditch hydro, which takes available water from the Kokei ditch, runs it through a pipe, delivers it for irrigation after it goes through a turbine. So that portion of the project will have less water available than it might have without the flow releases. So there'll be less water for the project, more water for the rivers for the run-of-ditch hydro part.
Must have misinterpreted. I've been to a few meetings where they talked about this pump storage. They stressed that it was a closed system. They needed 3 million gallons. It was going to come down at night to run the hydro and pumped up by solar power. Now you're telling me that water is going to be diverted for irrigation. That's two different stories you guys been telling me now.
The pump storage part, when we had that community meeting at the theater a couple of years ago, that part is still in place, using solar power to pump it up and down, or solar power to pump it up and generate when it comes down. This additional piece up above that uses the Kokei diversions, that was part of this mediation and part of working with DHHL to deliver irrigation water to their lands around Pōʻai, which is the upper reservoir for the pump storage part. So really it's incorporating some renewable energy production with delivering water that others are using for irrigation. That's part of a whole separate farming plan that's outside of KIUC. But we're, I guess you could say, bringing the pipe and working on the reservoirs as our contribution, but they're doing the farming and using the irrigation. So it's two different projects in a way that have come together as part of a bigger solution in the mediation.
Not a misinformation, because I thought you guys were getting your water from Pōʻai Reservoir. You were doing a study on that feasibility study.
The water that does come down from the Kekaha diversions will go to Pulua Reservoir. And we'll be repairing that reservoir. The proposal is to repair that reservoir and then use that water actually to be in sync with the pump storage. So at night it'll flow down when the sun isn't shining, but then we'll hold it back and slowly store it up during the day when the sun is out and we don't need the energy.
Now you're talking about Pōʻai. I asked them why they pump the water down to Pōʻai. They told me it was a decommissioned reservoir. Now you're going to use that one.
Yes, that's part of what's being done, is repairing that reservoir. So it'll be used for irrigation up around Pōʻai, but it'll also be used for the upper storage reservoir in the pumping scheme. And that's better for energy just because it's a shorter distance and a steeper pipe. So just in terms of providing economical power, it's a better solution for the utility than going all the way up to Pulua with a pipe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other KIUC questions while Jason is up here?
Please, how many megawatts does that generator represent that we saw in the presentation?
The one that was on the presentation up here?
Yes.
So those are two legacy hydros that belong to the sugar company. And I believe, Landis, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's 400 or 500 kilowatts for Waiava, and I believe 1.2 megawatts for Waimea Mauka, the upper one.
So they were not in use, or they were in use?
They have been in use continuously.
So it doesn't represent a lot of loss of power. Probably not there.
Well, there is less water going through the upper one as part of this. There is a decrease in the amount of power generated as a result of leaving more water in the river. And that's, you know, as Jeff was saying, part of the trade-offs that were worked out, how much water is needed to restore connectivity and make the habitat better, and, you know, sharing that with power production. Yes.
I'm wondering what percentage of the water that you're using for this, or the project to be, will be returning back to the stream of origin afterwards?
So the Kekaha portion of this, there are the in-stream flow releases at the diversion, just water that doesn't come out. And then the water that's diverted is going to irrigation. So in terms of the project, really, you can think of the project as a pipeline with a turbine at the end of it. It's not, right now the water would be flowing through open ditches going to the fields, and the power portion of it is going through pipes and a turbine to fields.
So you're saying, or I haven't heard an answer yet to the question, how much will be returned to the stream of origin?
Well, I guess in terms of the farm plan, whatever goes on the fields will not go back to the stream. So whatever is diverted for agricultural purposes will go on the fields and not into the stream. The in-stream flow release that CWRM regulates and sets is how much water is left in the stream and never diverted. So that's the portion that is kept in at the diversion.
That would be roughly how much? What percentage? 50?
Percentage-wise, I'm trying to recall numbers. It depends. During drier times of the year, I believe it's approximately 2/3 of the water, and during the wetter times of the year, it's I think there's another step where it's about half the water, and then when there's a lot of water, those higher flows can be diverted for power or irrigation or whatever other uses. But it's definitely biased towards more water or a greater percentage being left in during dry times, which are the times that are more strenuous for stream life. So it was biased, so the dry times more water is left in, percentage-wise. And there are times where there's no water to be diverted, just because there isn't even enough natural, I mean, the streams become very dry, as you know, in the summer. So there'll be times where no water is diverted.
Yeah,
Yes,
I think
Don.
this issue is brought up by Mrs. Cole. With all the sediments building up, when we do get, hopefully we won't, something like the Anahola flood, it was a 250-year probability event. When that happens, especially if we have big surf or Kona wind, it might go right over the top. Okay, but as you stated, we're returning minimum flows. We're restoring minimum in-stream flows. A classic book by James Carr, he said, no water, no life. Minimal water, minimum life. Also, he should have added minimal flushing. If you're not saving a lot of those medium, moderately high flows, you'll never get rid of that sediment. And again, these poor people will be digging it out for the next 500 years.
So you raise a couple good points. I'm sorry if I used the word minimum. Definitely there was an ideology as flows were talked about to leave more water in when it was dry, really bias those, what was left in when it was drier. The other thing that's important, and Aaron spoke to this a little bit, and I'm not a hydrologist, but just in looking at the flows, the sedimentation is largely a different issue from the habitat situation, where those pulse flows that you mentioned are tens of thousands of cubic feet per second, and the amounts that are being diverted, even during peak sugar times, are 30 CFS, 40 CFS, volumes like that total. So it's hundreds of times more when you get those real storm surges that wash out the banks and move the rubble down the river. Excuse me?
It's not flushing the sediment out of the The whole primary spawning ground for the open pit is buried in sediment. Mind you, sediments are the #1 negative impact on stream vegetation water.
I still had problems hearing you, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll speak a little louder.
Thank you.
The problem we have is that streams, public trust, Kauai, they produce lots of environmental services to us. They produce fish, they produce wildlife. They constantly clean out sediments from the stream to keep the boulders nice and clean, because that's what the opal need to spawn on. If they're buried in sediment, the eggs won't hatch. That's same with salmon in the Pacific Northwest. #1 problem, terrigenous sediments and fine sediments covering spawning substrate. You've lost the major spawning substrate in the Waimea River.
Thank you for repeating it. Thank you.
So we're addressing some really good things on it, improving recruitment of all these amphibian species. Opal by moving back upstream. But you're not addressing this sedimentation problem down Makau at all. And I think what he was trying to ask you, in the baseline data, 95% of the water was going out of the watershed. 95%. What percent's going back? That's what you bet, I think.
I follow. So the part of this project that KIUC is involved in is an alternative means of delivering irrigation water. It's not, well, the Kekaha ditch diverts and returns at the Waimea Mauka hydro plant. So the project that KIUC is involved in is basically part of an irrigation system.
For my lack of not knowing about this with KIUC, I thought that part of this project was for water storage to a degree, not water irrigation. Am I incorrect? Am I incorrect with where this is going with, or how is KIUC now delivering Kauai or irrigation water?
I can help. The water from the Koke ditch is the only way that PHHL can get water on its lands. So what Don is talking about with this irrigating is that, and that's one of the primary trust responsibilities of the water company, to make sure DHHL has water. So he's talking about irrigation, he's talking about delivering water for Hawaiian accidental fisheries of the
Yeah, so
question?
I think everybody, it's very clear, everybody's really concerned about the sedimentation. So I came to hear more about the mediation, so I don't know how many of you want to hear about the details of the mediation. I think it's really interesting that so many parties with very different goals were able to strike an agreement, and you know, I'm just, at this point, personally, I just wonder if it'll work. So I'd actually love to hear from KAA. I see Landis here, and I think Joe Munachika's here, the ag people, which have not yet been, you know, we haven't heard their perspective yet. I'd really like to hear, Landis, it would be great to hear from the KAA perspective, since you are party to the mediation in some way. You know, what, can you tell us about the ag use? Because I think a lot of the water that is being, that is going to be used in this mediation will be for irrigating the Manao Plain and the companies and the licensees that use that water. So can you tell me, can you tell us what your intentions are with current and future water use? Because this mediation is going to be long-term, right? It's not, the sediment is a here and now issue, but this mediation is forever. So I'd love to hear from the Department of Ag. I think this is Scott Enright and Landis, who is part of Kekaha Agriculture Association, which is the cooperative of licensees for the ag lands in Manao. So can you tell us about what your experience was with the mediation? Are you happy with it? What is your intention with water use? A lot of the land isn't yet being grown or cultivated, but do you see more of it being cultivated, and are you going to ask for more water?
I'd like to yield to Joshua Uehara. He's the president of the association, so he can.
Okay.
All right, and if there's a specific question that Landis needs to answer, then I'm sure there's plenty of time for that as well. Okay. All right, sorry about that. I forgot this is not a PA mic.
I don't think it works.
So
Is it on?
it's just for the camera.
For the TV.
It's not for the, yes, there's no PA. Just to answer the first part of your question, which was how did we, with different interests, sort of come together in this mediation? I think part of it is because, I mean, you can look at it as different parties with separate interests, but in reality, we're all part of the same community. I mean, I grew up in Waimea Valley. I used to grow taro when I grew up. I used to take it to Makaweli Pōʻai when John Ana was actually running the poi mill, and my dad still grows taro on Pei Kauai or Beninguni Ditch. So a lot of it, I think, was just coming from a common place. And I remember when I got involved in the board of KAA, I just joined the board it was like 10 months ago, I think, or something. Senate President Kochi actually sat me down at the beginning and he said, you got to remember, I went to school with your parents. You came from this community. So whatever you do, you got to make sure you understand you have to keep the overall best interests of the community in mind. You have to keep the fact that, my daughter was just born at KVMH, so she's going to grow up here. And he said, so think about the long term. Think about the community that we both came from. And that's the interest that you have to keep in mind through the process. So I think that that is basically some of the overall sort of consideration we took in looking at, okay, we might have some differences, but we all come from the same place. We're all going to live in the same place. Our kids are going to grow up here. And so that was, I think, part of the overall sort of driving force that brought us to an agreement in the end, rather than, 20 years when my daughter is graduating from college. So I think that was to answer the first part of your question. The second part, as far as agriculture, I mean, it's something when I sit in my office every day at work, I can see the Manao Plain, I can see some of the ridge tops. And I can remember when, there used to be productive agriculture, there used to be a...
I'm sorry, Josh,
Yep.
I'm really sorry. I know the time is really precious here.
Sure,
There's
sure.
so many different people in the room.
but I was actually just asking about numbers. I was asking about details. What kind of draw are you looking at for your ag uses, given that the monoplane is not fully cultivated right now? Are your plans to ask for water reservations based on a full cultivation? What's your approach as an agency and as a cooperative about your water plans in light of this mediation? Very specific.
Sure, I can answer. So I think actually in the mediation agreement, I think Jeff mentioned is actually on the CWRM website. So what we've asked for is for the Kekaha system, the point where we sort of start to draw water would be 6 million gallons a day. So I think that's compared to, I don't know, Landis, the plantation at that point would have been what, 35 million gallons. So from where the plantation was taking 35, we're going to be taking 6.
Is that based on a formula, the conventional ag formula for water, 2,500 gallons per acre per day? Is that how you did it?
Yeah, I mean, we use the formula based on the number of acres, the ag production acres that we're having to irrigate, and so that's how we got to that number. I don't know, Landis?
I think the other important thing to remember is I think we all recognize that our climate is changing, and we can't just stand around and not do anything about it. So one of the things the Agricultural Association is doing is we're looking at all of our water systems. Obviously, we've inherited systems from the sugar plantation era, and these systems were industrialized. They're industrialized by design. They're designed to apply large volumes at a given time. So we've taken a backseat approach now and looked at everything from a more environmental, conscientious approach and say, what do we really need and what is right? And we're embarking on an aggressive plan to enclose our water system in a pressurized pipe. Some of the numbers that we've looked at, we lose approximately 30% of our water through surface irrigation channels. And we can no longer tolerate that. We have to be more responsible. Josh alluded to the fact that we're community members, we live here. We want to do the right thing. You know, we want to be able to move forward and set precedents here for the next century. I mean, after all, what we just accomplished and solved was something that was in a century in the works. So it's a monumental task that what was achieved here today. And it's not stopping, it's not the end. I mean, we're looking at using our water more efficiently, more effectively. Also, on top of that, we're trying to aggressively bring new farmers to the community. We have these lands, these are public lands out in Mana. We need to put them to use. I mean, everyone's saying we need to grow more food. Well, we're working on that. The Department of Ag's working on that. We have 2 new mango orchards going in, large mango orchards. We have papayas that are going in, a big 100-acre papaya farm that's coming in. We're looking at some avocados. There's a host of other things that are still on the table, but we want to start diversifying the area more seriously. And the hope is to use the water that's agreed on this through the petition process to be able to supply the needs for the next century in agriculture out in Mana. So it's what we're doing here is not the end, it's the beginning. And as Don talked about the Oahu River, just putting water back into the stream is not going to solve the problem. There's a lot of things that need to happen. I mean, you know, the Oahu need help. I mean, we talked about the sedimentation in the Waimea River bed. I mean, that is the biggest problem. One of the biggest problems is the silting on the lower estuary. The Oahu lay their eggs, they can't get fertilized, it gets washed out to the ocean. What little do survive end up getting destroyed by the non-native prawns in the river. And then whatever else survives gets impacted by disease that is being transmitted by the medaka, the mosquito fish. So, you know, alien species are impacting our river. We spend a lot of time and effort eradicating alien species in the mountain. Perhaps we need to start looking at eradicating alien species in the river to help the Opo and Opai population to get a jump start, clean the river, restore the gravel beds so that the next generation can spawn and be successful. And then we can make things right. So we've taken the approach and we want to do what's right. I mean, it's common sense. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's all about common sense. And we hope we're accomplishing that. And you know, this was a multi-party decision. It was difficult, but it's a give and take world. So, okay, thank you.
I just have one more question, and it really has to do with the KAA's actions in light of this mediation. It's really noticeable that the ditches have been widened a really lot. On the way to Polihale, they've been really like doubled in size. And I'm wondering, can you tell us what that's for? Why do you need so much more water going through those widened ditches, going all the way out to Polihale? There's a lot of excavation going on to widen those ditches.
The ditches that you see are actually storm ravines. They're not considered actually a ditch. It's not an irrigation ditch. It's just a channel to transmit storm waters. I mean, here we're talking about Waimea River being silted. And perhaps the capacity of Waimea River is no longer there. There's a risk of flooding to the community. Mana is no different. The silt coming off the mountain is tremendous. It's silting up these channels. We're not actually making the channels wider. Just by removing some of the vegetation makes it seem it's wider. But in reality, they're actually being silted up. They're getting shallower. So we're removing silt to make sure that the property doesn't flood. It's no different than Waimea River. Same problem.
So no relation to the mediation.
No relation to that.
Yeah, no, I mean that's really just to prevent Kekaha from flooding and the town from flooding.
It's not near Kekaha.
Well, we have ravines in Kekaha, and a lot of people don't realize if those ravines don't get clean, Kekaha floods. It's happened before in the past, and we do it not because we need, in a sense we need to, but we do it as part of because we're part of the community. It's something that's a responsible thing to do. So we incur that cost to protect the community, and that's what everyone should do. It's just a give and take, and we should all work together on solving our problems. So.
I don't know, any questions for us, I guess, before? Any other questions for us?
I guess on that Mana is like a swampland, right? So it's naturally supposed to be full with water. So you guys are farming there. So you guys are using agricultural resources to keep the place dry by making your flood ditches. But that's probably not the right place to farm. That's why. That was a swamp right there. They used to use canoes to take the taro back and forth, right? So you're in a place where naturally it's going to flood. So by trying to keep that place dry, I think that's the best place to farm. Wasting some of our valuable state and federal flood money that could be used in Waimea River, where the flooding over there could actually affect lives of people and not just cornfields. I believe there was federal money that was used to create your flood ditches in the Mana Plains. That should be used for Waimea River to take care of the people.
Yeah, I think the money, the federal money came from the U.S. Navy for the pumping station, and the Navy puts it in because there's portions of the base that floods. So that's a total separate deal. It's not, our kuleana, but.
The ditch alongside the highway, okay, you guys gonna stop the flow from the ditch coming down?
I don't think we can stop it completely. Part of the problem with a ditch system like this, and with this, as Landis mentioned, we're working on enclosing parts of it with pipe. So once we do invest the eventually millions of dollars it takes to enclose the system in pipe, then you can turn it on and off. Before you put a pipe in there, if you turn an open surface ditch off, you'll never turn it back on. Within 6-7 months, weeds will grow, trees will grow in it. So part of it is, unfortunately, we have to keep a certain amount of flow just to keep the system working so that we can farm that area. But we're working actively on enclosing the piping. Part of it is, part of the projects that we're working on to bring smaller farmers, they have a difficult time also working with some of the way the current system is designed. So we're actively working with the state to make investments to enclose the system, which then allows us to use the water more efficiently, to use exactly the amount of water. It would be like turning on a tap at that point. But until we get to that point, then there are going to be flows in some of these ditches just to keep the ditches open so they can be used for farmers.
My question about that is, about 2-3 years ago, you had all these brush fires up here. They had a whole lot of meetings about it, and nobody had any common sense. How do you put out a fire? Water.
Yeah, I think one of the things in the whole scheme of everything, we recognize that concern, that there needs to be fire protection as part of this equation. That 700 gallons a minute that's coming down from Kokea right now, actually that valve, there's a connection there to fill fire trucks. We've learned from that mistake. We need to be able to fill emergency equipment with water, but it's fair to say that that amount is probably going to be a lot less moving on in the future. At the same time, when, as Josh said, you take water out of a ditch, you start getting problems with cracking, and you start losing the integrity of the ditch. So that's a real big concern, because throughout Hawaii, a lot of ditches have been abandoned, and to get them resurrected again is almost impossible. So we don't want that to happen, because in the future, there may be a specific need for that, and we want to space. It's a public resource. It's our responsibility to protect it.
Thank you for having protected it for all this time.
Did you want to say something? Whoever brought the food, thank you very much. There's a lot of it left over there, so I'm offering it, although I didn't bring it. There's a lot of food, so help yourself, I would think. I want to thank all the parties that were here today. All 5 parties showed up to represent, to ask their questions, to present their issues. Thank you all for being here. The public, thank you for your concern, your interest, your care, your passion. It's important. It's your island, it's your stream, so thank you very much for sharing that.